Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading property experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle channel, and Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the 2014 and 2015 Property Investment Advisors of the Year.
All right, folks, you're on the Property Couch, where each week Ben and I bring you the insider's guide to property finance and money management. Mate, how about those pies, eh?
I was just about to lead in big weekend in footy. Like big weekend.
I just got in before you.
Yeah,
I didn't watch any game except for that one.
We're on the slide.
You're on the
Down the sixth. Oh, God, it was hard to watch. It was hard to watch. I did watch the game.
For all the rugby league listeners, they probably should.
Yeah.
If they want to
we're getting on with it. If
they want to go and remind themselves of what 1990s rugby league looked like.
Oh, yeah, not very cool stuff.
Hey, Ben, today I just want to kick off with my Mindset Minute. It's a very simple one. This quote's actually unknown, but I think it's a good one in the lead off to what we're going to talk about today.
Sure.
But worry does not empty tomorrow of its sorrow. It only empties today of its strength.
Ooh, that's very good.
So,
yeah,
and we're going to talk a bit today about some people are worrying a bit
confidence.
at the moment. So, worry does not empty tomorrow of its sorrow.
No.
Because you still got to go through the motions, but it only empties today of its strength. And I thought that was...
I think it's really clever. It's like saying there's opportunity in tomorrow and you're in control of that. So I think that's...
Well, worry's not going to do it.
It's going to hurt you, not help you, isn't it?
But every listener's going to go, no, but if it was that easy, but tomorrow's going to come anyway, isn't it? So,
glass half full, crew, not glass half empty.
Worry does not empty tomorrow of its sorrow. It only empties today of its strength, Ivis. There's one for you. Hey, there we go.
Okay, RBA this week, Bryce. Thought I'd just throw in there with RBA. So, big, the last time that the... Ivis gave me all these things to talk about, so I'm talking about them.
Go for it.
No change. In fact, no change probably until the end of 2019
Is your RBA announcement a bit like the weather report for Darwin?
31 afternoon showers.
Yeah, 31 afternoon showers.
31 afternoon showers, 31 it's getting a little that way, but it's what's interesting is obviously the outer rate cycle movements are happening.
Do you know what's good about your RBA announcements?
What's that?
Mate, is you don't just say the RBA kept the rates on hold, you give a little bit. You give a little bit of embellishment.
So the big story, for the trifecta, so we've got 2 out of 3 of the trifecta. Thanks for the old bloke reference. I just heard Ivis. So 2 out of 3 in the trifecta we've got, right? So we've got the economy's moving pretty well.
Okay.
So it's, it's almost in trend growth. We've got inflation is still, unemployment's all right. Business confidence is up, so we're starting. But I tell you what, this is the consumer side that's the problem now. Whereas, we're going out and spending and getting into record household debt. Now we're not interested in playing.
All right.
We're keeping our money in our pockets. So that's a problem. So consumer spending, consumer sentiment's going to put pressure on inflation, which is obviously going to put pressure on the rates going up anytime soon, except for these out-of-cycle cost of money pressures that the banks are having. So from an RBA point of view, don't panic. Just factor in, some maybe 10, 15, 20 basis points over the course of the next year in terms of out-of-cycle movements, but there will be no change to the cash rate upwards at this point anyway.
Heard it first. Folks. All right, keep going, mate. I'm enjoying this.
No, well, we've got a webinar, Bryce. We've got a webinar. Would you like me to keep going?
Yeah, I would.
Even I can hear Ivis again then.
Yeah.
So, Bryce, we've got a webinar. 7 Deadly Sins. Tonight. So we've got to be up and about for that. So we'll have, we've got a little nap. We had a little nap before.
A little nap this afternoon.
And we look for the old bloke.
Yeah, that's right.
A little bit into the old bloke.
Get your little rug, yep.
So we've got that webinar. Ivis says, look, I've got her laughing even more.
7:30 tonight. Only if you live on the East Coast.
Only if you live on the East Coast. And then
if you live in Adelaide, it's 7.
Yes, that's right.
If you live in Perth, it's what?
5.
No, 5:30.
30. I bet I was just taking a breath. I was swallowing as I was taking a breath.
Obviously, you're conserving energy for tonight now.
All right, so that's me done. What else have you got?
No, there's more.
Well, share. What have you got? Have you got anything for me?
What have you got?
I've got nothing more.
All right,
that's all I got told to talk about.
If you want to check out, today we're going to talk about...
Is there any space in the webinar left?
There'd be a handful of spots, Ben.
Love it. Just a handful.
A handful.
Now there's only one handful. Now there's only 2 fingers.
Okay, keep going.
That's all right. All right, what do we got?
All right, folks, don't you wish you were in here with Ben? He's in good form today. And a couple other things. We're on the Today Show on Saturday, Ben.
Yes.
We got up at
How's your
Sparrows.
earpiece falling out?
Anyway, the old earpiece blew out. So, but kept on going, Ben. Show must go on.
You were professional.
Show must go on. So Ivis will have that in Facebook. So that'll be there for you to check out.
Yep. So we obviously we were talking about the so-called correction in the market.
Plummet. I thought it was a plummet.
Well, it was a tumble.
It was a tumble.
It was, a rapid fall, but yeah, we're going to set the record
That's
straight.
what we're going to talk about today, Ben. And it's kind of just going to be our response to what's happening in the marketplace.
Yep.
Because it's what we talked a little bit about on the Today Show. We want to embellish it today for our community.
Love it.
Because a lot of people, Ben, are wondering, should they still be investing in property? Should they be investing now? Why now? If the headlines are so terrible, why should we even be considering about that? So we want to address a few of those things.
We do. We want to set the record straight on a couple of facts.
It was interesting, we were chatting to a client who was in Sydney. One of our team here, Ben, one of the buyer's agents, and I were chatting with this client.
Mm-hmm.
And they're sitting in sort of a bloodbath of negative headlines in Sydney and wanted to know whether or not they should proceed to buy a property here in Melbourne.
Yep.
And what's interesting is that because of the negative sentiment that had been sitting in that market, it was really polluting their paradigm as to other markets. So today we want to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk about the 5 golden rules. We're also going to talk about the fact that Australia is not one big market.
Yep.
Also, Australia is not just Melbourne and Sydney. And Melbourne is not just one sort of little demographic down in the Bayside, because there's a whole range of things. What I reckon you've
should lead off. Well,
yeah.
well, let's tell that story, okay? So the national market overall, over the course of the last 12 months, is off 1.9%. Okay, so nationally...
Well, that's a plummet.
That's an absolute free fall. In terms of, big markets, so we'll talk about Sydney annually off 5.4, Melbourne off 0.05 of 1%.
Oh, that's a tumble.
That's a tumble. Brisbane 1.2 up, Adelaide 0.7 up, Perth 2.3% down, Hobart 11.5% up, Darwin 6.2% down, Canberra 2.4% up. So, annually we're sitting okay in terms of capitals. Overall, annually total return is still up nationally 1.9%. So, interesting numbers. But I wanted to take a bit of a deeper dive. Mm-hmm. This is the bit that I think is important to note from our good friends at CoreLogic with their monthly report here. So, when we talk about the different markets within markets, the way in which they've presented this is terms of upper quartile, middle quartile, I'll see if I can get that word right, upper quartile, which is the top 25%, the middle quartile, and then the lower quartile, where we've got the different markets. Okay, so if you think about it, the upper market is the prestige and the higher end value properties.
Top 25%?
Top 25%. Middle market is basically, the sort of, you'd probably call that from...
Bell curve.
Yeah, the bell curve. Well, I'm sort of thinking from a kilometre point of view, it's different in every city, so it's probably hard to draw that out. And then you've got the lower quartile, which is the cheapest 25% of the market. Mm. So let's just do around the grounds to sort of get a sense of how this looks. So Australia-wide, the only market that's correcting by around 4% is the upper quartile. In terms of the middle and lower quartile, they're both up. And if we go into each of those capital centres and our state capitals and territory capitals, Canberra, up. So upper quartile, middle quartile and lower quartile, the whole market's moving up. Darwin, all 3 quartiles are moving down. Hobart, all up. Perth, all down. Adelaide, all up. Brisbane, all up.
Oh, you've messed it up.
Melbourne, the upper quartile is down around 4%. And then the middle and lower quartiles are up. Mm. In fact, the lower quartile of Melbourne is up around 7%. And for Sydney, rounding out our biggest capital city, you're talking about the upper quartile down around 8%, the middle quartile down around 4 to 5%, and the lower quartile down probably around 1.5 to 2%. Mm. So that just goes to show you. So Melbourne's a good example because we've been telling people that we've been picking the eyes out of Melbourne, and that's because we're still under competition. These other markets are still performing reasonably well, and we have to compete against those other buyers in those good markets. So coming back to your, the client that you were talking to out of Sydney, there's a good news story there. Population growth's a good story into Melbourne. It's not the only thing, but certainly it helps. And also, good, strong economies. But
the biggest risk we have in this country, we've said it many times, is the stopping of bringing people into the country, immigration. Because, the word plummet, that's how they opened the Today Show segment, free fall. But that only happens when the underlying demand diminishes or a major external shock event happens.
Correct.
And so the point is, and we're getting it a fair bit in Melbourne, but what you just highlighted with those quartiles, in terms of anecdotally, our briefs that we're dealing with in the business, the price point is getting lower, right? Not because the client can't afford a higher price point, it's actually because the lending restrictions are forcing these briefs to be at a lower price point, which is then creating more demand. So well and truly up to 750 in Melbourne, up to 750 in Brisbane, for example, they're really strong competitive markets. We took a swing and missed last month, 11 properties, Ben. Yeah. It was, we're professional buyers who understand value. We understand how to comp properties. We understand that we don't turn up unless we've actually got a proper budget. We don't make a recommendation to the client. We don't get seduced by a buyer's guide. And we're still missing properties on the ground in the field that are investment grade.
That's right. So we bought 30 and missed on 11. So it just goes to show you that in some cases we've missed because we didn't see value at the price point that property sold for. So, that means that there are other buyers out there. So some people see this as a negative for the market. We see it as obviously still good opportunity to potentially pick the eyes out of the good areas. I mean, ultimately, and I know, in terms of what we do here, we're buying upwards of 40 properties a month. And that's what we're looking for, those best opportunities for those people who see opportunity in the market when everyone sees fear in the market.
So what we can tell you, folks, is our clients are getting themselves in a position where they're cash flow certain. They know what their cash flows look like, not only for today, tomorrow, and next year, but they know what their cash flows are looking for this decade and the next, and even in most cases further than that. So we always say, when do you buy your next property? When your cash flows allow. So underpinning that means that the client base has real strength and confidence in knowing that they can go ahead. And therefore, they're just, on our encouragement as professional buyers, our clients are licking their lips at the thought of buying in the market that is actually having clearance rates. I've seen clearance rates in Melbourne because I get it first thing on a Saturday evening. There was a 5. It was 59%. It's like, whoa. Good. So I can imagine what the headlines are looking like, but it's not reflective of the entire market. So it's important for people to know that those in these buying times, you've got to get the foundations right and remember that we're made up of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of submarkets in this country.
Well, that's that lift the eyes piece, and we're sort of covering off a little bit on the 5 golden rules. So why don't we start with number 1, Bryce?
Yeah, number 1 is, and for those people who have been with us since day 1, Ben, this will come as absolutely no surprise to them whatsoever. But if you buy right now the right property and you hold it for the long term, you will be fine. So the fact that medium and high density, almost ad nauseum on this podcast, but people are still buying medium to high density. It was never good in the FOMO market.
No.
So it's absolutely not good now in a changing market.
So right property selection is our number 1 tip. And really when we talk about right property selection, it's got to have a home on land somewhere, and that location of that land is critical for us. So we absolutely still love the idea of asset selection in owner-occupied country with good scarcity. We talk about investment grade, okay, and investment grade is that owner-occupier appeal that comes through that story as well. So if you're going to focus on the first golden rule of buying anything, it's buying a quality property.
Flight to quality. Not only of property, Ben, but of location.
Yes.
You can come closer in, you can get closer to the train, you get closer to the human interest and human behaviour. location and then property. It's interesting, when you've had a market that's done really well like Melbourne, and it hasn't had the same apartment market as, say, Sydney has, where it's more
softer growth.
Well, but it's also more
lower density.
Yes, but just the keep going, mate.
I'm trying to help you out here. You're looking up at the sky.
Well, pardon me talking while you're interrupting. I'm almost there.
I was just thinking, is it coming? I'm helping. Sorry, go.
It's more socially acceptable to live in higher density in Sydney than it is in Melbourne, right?
Yes.
So,
yep.
But the thing is that you've had this affordability challenge in Melbourne, and so where the opportunity I think exists is some of the assets we've been buying now for the last couple of years, which is that in the inner west, inner north, inner northwest,
yep.
where you can get an old school 70s style flat, man. That's probably going to have a little bit of price elasticity coming on there, where under 750 firsties are getting in, they're getting back into the market. That price point seems to be quite straightforward for getting finance, and so as that pent-up demand kicks in, I think there's an opportunity, as opposed to using on the south side in Melbourne, for example, where I think there's just loads and loads and loads of those flats, and St Kilda and surround, like there's just heaps of them, right?
Yeah, and generationally we'll come to be happy with that type of living. But
have to.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if we want to have the lifestyle drivers, those sort of things, the emotional connection with an area and the status and all of those types of things, and the economic drivers that make sure that there's restaurants and bars and cafes and all of those things that make it attractive to live there, people are going to swarm to those areas over time, and those property prices will go up. The question is what's driving the intrinsic value is the land that it lives on.
Yes.
In terms of that underlying fundamental value is the land in which it lives on.
Well, even if you have the flat spend, if you're buying 500, you're probably 100 of it's to the building and 400's towards the land. So that land to value asset ratio is still good. But there's a little one. We'll just throw that out there. See if it sticks for the folks.
All right. Number 2 is optimal financing, Bryce. Do tell.
Ben, I think I've said this. My eldest, Jack, loves chess at the moment, right?
Oh, okay, good.
And I've been playing quite a bit with him over the last 6 months, and he's actually really good.
Oh, good.
But at first it was I'd pants him, right? Because I've got basic understanding of chess.
How old's your son? He's almost 8, 7, 8.
He's 7.
And you should be panting your 7-year-old.
Well,
because are you trying to teach him a lesson?
No, here's the deal, right? When you're really good at something, and you're really good at something, you know how to ease the foot off the accelerator a little bit. Whereas when I'm just learning, like he's just said, Dad, do you want to play chess? So I'm learning at the same time, right?
Okay,
so I'm as competitive as he is, and I was beating him, right? But now,
funny that. And do you see what I'm seeing, bro? He's like naive to the whole idea that he's got 30 years on his son.
Yeah, it's form's reversed. Don't worry about that. Hey? He who laughs last longest, right? So he wins more than me now because what he's worked out is he has to think 2 or 3 moves ahead. Because what would happen is he'd recklessly get his rook straight up the thing and bang, and he'd go, oh, hadn't thought about that. He just thought about his current move. Yeah. So now what he does is, and for any chess players out there, I'm only new to the game. Yeah. If you put as soon as you take your fingers off, that's your move.
That's move.
Leave your fingers on, that's fine. So what he's doing now is he's keeping his fingers on.
Then thinking about the consequences.
Goes, I see what's going there.
Retreat.
Brings it back. Okay. So what's chess about? Seeing what the next move is and seeing the move after that is.
Yes.
Well, finance, folks, is no different.
Game of strategy.
It's a game of strategy. But if you're going to buy one investment property, finance doesn't give a rip, Ben.
No.
Cross-collateralise it. Yep. Let the bank run
hold
the agenda.
Both assets.
Don't worry about it. Just get a transaction done really smoothly. But if you plan on buying 2 investment properties or more, make sure you've got a borrowing strategy, not a borrowing capacity, because it is unbelievably critical. And part of that is release equity now so that you've got no cash flow issues in the next few years. Yeah,
so we talk about holding a buffer. Now that buffer could be, it's no good if that buffer is just in equity, right? Because if we have a cash flow crisis, no good in having that just in equity where we go back to the bank and say, my situation's a little bit tight, do you reckon you could spot me 10 grand? So obviously when our position is well served that we have everything set up from your Money Smarts point of view, have your offset account and those types of things, then having a little $10,000 buffer or $20,000 buffer that just sits in your offset account that you just know is there for a rainy day. And we've said this before, in terms of great money management for us, is that money doesn't exist. Your balance starts from $10,001, not from $10,000. That's not your money, okay? Because obviously if you use it, it's actually the bank's money, but it's just nice to know that it's there. And in some cases, people get that out in small little personal lines of credit that just sit to the side as well for emergency types of situations.
Love it. So
optimal financing, it happens, you do it when you're thriving or when there's also challenging markets.
So the people that we've had on the podcast, Ben, who've had some success, bought the right property,
yes,
and they got their finance correct. So they got those two right. They didn't care what the market was, but in a changing market, it's more important than ever. Third one I think people should think about is make sure at this point in time that you know your numbers, because it's critical. Because smart property investors, professional property investors are licking their lips right now. They know their numbers, they've got their buffers in place, they know what assets they should be buying. They're waiting now that the clearance rates have come down, and they're actually going and buying in under reduced competition because, Ben, they know their numbers and they have plenty in reserve to make sure that if, for whatever reason, they were to lose their income, for example, hopefully they've got number 4 right, we'll talk about that in a sec. But if they lose their income, Ben, they're not worried about that.
Yeah, look, it does stagger me, Bryce, when people talk about holding off to get the bottom. So there's a lot of people who think like that. And if you listen to any astute investor who've been around for a long time, you buy when you can afford to buy and you accumulate. So if it's a share play, there's a lot of very smart people who operate in the share industry who talk about the bottom of the market. And they go, I'm waiting for the market to correct. I'm waiting for the market to go down. In some cases, the market doesn't go down. At the end of the day, you're buying a business. And if that business has good competitive advantages, strategic competitive advantage, guess what? Their share price goes up. It doesn't matter about what's happening with the market in terms of these are reasonable buying opportunities. But in the property market, everyone seems to go, just wait for it to hit the bottom. And how many people are doing that? Heaps.
Do you want the properties that hit the bottom?
Correct. And when is the bottom? No one knows when we got to the bottom. I mean, we got to the bottom in Sydney in July of last year. We got to the bottom, to the top of the market in July last year. We got to the top of market technically for Melbourne's median house price. Again, I'm generalising here. We got to the top of the market in September. Okay, and so it's been sort of creeping off from those high points. No one's going to know. So if everyone's sort of sitting back going, I'm waiting, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, there goes the bottom. Oh, wait a minute, it's actually, and then all of a sudden everyone jumps in. Guess what? There's that FOMO. Fear of missing out occurs again. There's this pent-up demand. So buy, as number 3 suggests, in terms of know your numbers, buy when you can afford to buy. Cash flow is king. Make sure you can hold on to it. Make sure you've got at least 6 months of reserve in your kitty if something was to go wrong. Because if you have a property and you can't hold on to it in 2 or 3 years' time and you've got to sell that property and the market has been a little bit flat, you're probably going to have red ink because of all the acquisition costs. So we always talk about short term in the property market for us as an investor, not as a speculator, not as someone who's trying to get a quick gain out of the market, is 7 to 10 years as a minimum, medium term 10 to 25 years, and then long term 25 years and beyond. So really important to focus in on that.
Ben, and the people who are fearful, and let's unpack the fear, the people who are fearful and need to wait to the bottom are the ones that are listening to the market noise.
Correct.
Because if you're not listening to the market noise, Ben, what's to be fearful? If your decision is underpinned by demand, and the way that you have your decision underpinned by demand is the fact that you've bought an asset in the first place that is investment grade, that has all of the fundamentals, that creates that floor underneath it anyway, there's always demand, number one. Number two, if you have actually gone to an investment savvy mortgage broker who has set up your loans not only for this purchase, but for Jack's second and third move on the chessboard, and you've got a buffer in place, and your own cash flows are freed up, what are you fearful of? Sure, if we've talked about this before, in the GFC, Melbourne went down 8.33%. But if you held it, it wasn't a balance sheet issue, which wasn't a daily fluctuation of the asset value. It was a daily fluctuation of your profit and loss statement or your cash flow statement.
Yep.
Do I have enough to pay the interest at the end of the month for this property, irrespective of what's actually happening externally to the value? Because I'm not selling it in a position of weakness. I'm actually going to revalue against it in a position of strength at some point in time in the future when the property's actually gone up in value. So if you're fearful, because what that's saying is, I just want to see if the market's going to come off or if the government. What that's saying is, I'm afraid, but no one actually wants to front foot that and say I'm afraid. So they come up with all these sideways excuses to say I'm afraid. But at the end of the day, look under the bonnet and say, okay, what am I afraid of? And if you've got those fundamentals sorted, right property, know your numbers, have optimal finance strategy, you can remove elements of the fear. It's really just major external shocks that are left.
Bryce, what's the worst type of seller you can be? What's the worst type of seller you can be?
Someone in a position of weakness.
A forced seller. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about flight to quality on the opportunity side, but the last thing you want to be is a forced seller in a marketplace that has lots of other forced sellers in it, right? So you nailed it beautifully. It's a cash flow story, okay? So it's looking at your cash flow forecasts to write it out. If you can write it out, where's your problem? Now, we do know that there's going to be some people who have got interest-only loans are going to be switching over to principal and interest. So I think people who have multiple properties in their portfolio that have delivered out a higher yielding strategy, and now some of those properties are being rolled over to principal and interest, and they need to, and that could be a credit critical, or if it's not a credit critical decision and they're rolling over to P&I, their cash flows are in a bit of a challenge. Guess what they are, Bryce? They are forced sellers in a marketplace that they don't really want to be a forced seller in. So that has been out of their control to a degree, but the reality is they should have done their cash flows, and they should be talking now to their property mortgage investment savvy mortgage brokers to try and get that story working properly for them. But in some cases, some of them may have to liquidate a couple of their little cash cows. And what's interesting is, as we saw from the data, the cheaper stuff at the moment is the most attractive stuff. So they might be a little bit blessed because traditionally people who buy growth assets have to kick in a bit, okay, and normally their cash flows can support that. But for the lower income mum and dad investor, they like the fact that the property can sort of pay for itself. But if they get 2 or 3 of them and start replicating that too quickly, they could be in a little bit of a situation where they might have to divest of one of them. And if they've had no growth in those areas because they were chasing yield, but the growth hasn't hit their area yet, there's going to be a bit of red ink on their balance sheet. So that's a challenge for them.
Strategy is important, Ben. Do you know how you often get someone come up to you and say, Ben, what would you tell your 20-year-old self based on what you know now? Well, the GFC was 8 years ago. And what would I tell myself in 2007 from what I know now? I would actually tell myself these very basic things. Buy the right asset, make sure I'm correctly financed and know my numbers. Because I can talk from experience. I actually had to sell in the GFC in a position of weakness because my strategy wasn't clear at the time. I had poor finance options, so I wasn't able to ride it through. And if you remember, just after the GFC, interest rates went up. They didn't go down. Well, they eventually went down, but they went up first. So I was actually, when the tide goes out, you see you swimming naked, and I made some terrible mistakes back then, which I've rectified now. But I'm certainly not talking about a theory here. I'm talking about the biggest financial crisis in my lifetime. I was exposed on a couple of these golden rules. And I had to make sure that I fixed that. So
lessons well learned from your point of view, and I think that is also a lesson for anyone who is investing or wants to get ahead quickly. You can move from comfortable opportunity to greed. I'm not saying that was your situation, but it's certainly for some of these.
I had flippant regard to strategy at the time. It was a debt servicing debt strategy. And it was the equity servicing equity strategy, and it's flawed in the changing times. It's a flawed strategy. Does it work? Yes, it does work, Ben. So I'm not here saying it doesn't work, but it relies on APRA not putting handbrakes on. It relies on easy access to credit. It relies on no external handbrakes.
But those ones who have gone out and bought 7 properties in 7 minutes, right? The ones that we were told about 10 properties in 10 years and retire comfortably and all that type of stuff. I'll tell you what, here's the deal. We've learnt this, it's come to roost again, and I've seen it happen throughout the 30 years that I've been sort of following the markets and the 20 years that I've been active in terms of advising and you know, sort of, I suppose, building up my skill sets in this area, is that the ones who get greedy and go hard too much, they're increasing their risk. And when they do increase that risk, the risk reward story for them is some of them get through and fly, but there are a lot of people who get caught in the net when, you know, everything catches up to them, or the economy catches up to them, or the regulators catch up to them, or whatever it may be. So that has probably been a lesson for me around, you know, playing it safe. I mean,
why do you think that you're good at that? Because I've got to say, and I've got to tell the listeners, you are very good at staying level. You don't get too high up, you never get too low down, and you keep very you keep your eye on the prize pretty well. Why do you think that you don't get carried away with?
Well, I think it's probably the 20-year-old self that, well, you know, I was 23 when I bought my first property, and that's probably been part of my success story. I just started earlier. Hey, mate, I've been ripped off. Like, you know, I've been involved in a Ponzi scheme, so I've you know, I've had the eyes lifted, and you know, so that's part of my journey too. Now, so, you know, there's things like that happen in life that you've got to understand. So even the most astute people, you know, can be focused on this whole idea of if it is too good to be true, it often is. And even when you think you know the person really, really well, you can still, you know, obviously, you know, get caught out. So don't think that I'm perfect and I don't have any, you know, sort of challenges in my story.
It's not a single listener who thinks you're perfect, mate, because you're a Collingwood supporter. So, yeah.
But I play the long game, you know, like, and ultimately I plan. You know, I spend a lot of time in terms of thinking about my next move on that chessboard. Not that I play chess, but you know.
I'll give you a game then. I'll pants you.
All right, what are we up to? Number 4, defence.
Defence. For me, the defence is best summarised by the image of a moat around a castle. So that is the best defence for the person.
High walls. Yep. Water to slow people down. Crocodiles in the water.
So correct. The drawbridge, you're in control of who comes in, who comes. So that's the image. Yeah. What is that in the reality? 3 things: protecting assets, protecting income, protecting lifestyle. Get those 3 points right, and that everything just flows from that. Assets are obvious: insurance for the building, landlord's protection insurance. But the income stuff is if I was to lose my income from something outside of my control for a temporary period of time, am I covered so that my portfolio hasn't been built on a house of cards bin? Little wind comes along and it blows over, so that you can fix the broken leg or whatever it is that keeps you out of income earning capacity and you're back to work. Or worse, Ben, and you've talked about it a couple of times, but if something happens to you that you aren't able to earn an income forever, so your lifestyle, not just your income's affected, but your lifestyle is affected, and you've got dependents, or you've got family members, or you've got loved ones that are relying on you. You've got to. That's the drawbridge down. The water's empty. No crocodiles anymore. The walls have come low. That's when you're really, really, really vulnerable.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's risk in everything that we do. All we're trying to do is minimise that risk, and so. If you're thinking about the costs associated with that, you're not looking at it the right way. You need to be thinking about that money is an asset. It's an asset that I never want to call upon to be able to protect me in the interest that something goes wrong. That's when that money is going to be there for me. And that's why I put those insurances. I mean, we do it on our cars, we do it on our contents in our homes. So the reality is you are the biggest and most important asset in your family and in everything going around, bigger than your car. In a lot of cases, far more valuable than your home in terms of your earning potential. So you should make sure that you've got those protections in place. And a lot of people think they have it through their super, but the reality is we know that there's more to that story. So make sure you circle back and understand exactly what you are protected for in some of those automatic super personal insurances and income protection insurance policies that are available in some super funds. So always go back and get some advice around that stuff.
So Ben, 4 of the 5 golden rules are: make sure you choose the right property. 2, make sure you've got optimal financing. 3, make sure you know your numbers. 4 is create some defence. Ben, bring it home.
Number 5 is the borderless investor concept. So remember, guys, that we're, in these changing markets, we've got to lift our eyes. We've got to lift our eyes and say to ourselves, where's the best buying opportunity for me now? I told you that there are markets in growth. Those markets include pockets of Melbourne. They include Adelaide. They include Brisbane. They include Canberra. Hobart's cooling off a little bit, but they are markets that are going well. There are regional markets that are in growth. Some regional markets in Victoria in growth. Some regional markets in New South Wales are in growth. Southeast Queensland corridor is in growth phase. So there is definitely opportunity out there, but we've got to say to ourselves, if that opportunity is there, how do I go and get it? And if I can't go and get it myself, get some advice from someone who can help you deliver that.
Ben, they're very, very foundational things that we've talked about, but they're very, very important to go through a changing market. They're the things that you need to think about. So I think it's a good discussion, and hopefully that's helped some people out there who are boxing at potentially some shadows, Ben, around what they're seeing at the headline level. You said it earlier today when we were chatting. Why can't we have a story that says property's going to be okay? It's not going to fly, it's not going to crash, it's going to be okay.
It's our biggest asset in this country. It's significantly bigger than any other asset class in the nation. So it's a good news story, and we've all got a vested interest. So when we are talking about property, everyone likes to listen. So we're either in boom or bust. We're not necessarily in a flat market.
Now, Ben, just to close that off, I was caught up with a bunch of guys that I enjoy catching up with. They're all buyers agents. We had lunch together on Friday of last week.
Yep.
And it was funny that one of the guys, Mark, he said, isn't it interesting as a buyer's agent, we always get the people talking to us and they go, Bryce, little nudge, mate, whenever you get a good deal, make sure you let me know. Sure, no worries. Yeah. Whenever you get a good deal, make sure you let me know, right? Well, it's kind of a collective little nudge now to everyone in the marketplace. Hey, there's a good deal to be had.
There is some good deals out there.
Get some good deals out there. So now's the time.
Good deals.
But the problem is that the masses aren't sort of even. Your taxi driver's not telling you to buy property, so it's a bit nervy. But if we go back and we make sure that we're getting a good deal on the right properties with the correct finance, knowing what our numbers are, making sure that we've built a moat around the castle, and we consider that this is a big concept here, Ben. Australia's more than just Melbourne and Sydney. There are actually other capitals. It's important to know that you'll be okay.
Well, I think, a correction of 1.6% nationally. Facebook dropped 18% in a day, probably in more like an hour within a day, right? And now there's been all this talk around good value, not so good value, change of market, not as profitable anymore. Is Facebook dead? I'll put it out there. And this is not advice, but I reckon in 12 months' time, Facebook share price is going to be more than what it is today. Yeah. So I don't know anything about shares, but I do know about eyeballs, and I do know about the opportunity that these big companies have in having so many people that they can pivot and they can bring in other revenue streams. But we just get so cool, it's all this regulation, it's all this other stuff, it's all this, privacy stuff. It's like, revenues are down and future value, it's not going to come through. Okay, let's just see what happens in the next 12 months.
Correct.
Because there might be opportunity in all things.
It's a modern day where people gather, Ben, and for as long as we want to gather with other people, and sadly as we get to the 21st century, we gather more electronically than we do. And there's a lot of reasons why you get stuck.
And I don't hold shares in Facebook for full disclosure. By the time this goes to air, and maybe halfway through the year, I might own some shares. But right now, in terms of my comment around Facebook, I am not a shareholder in Facebook.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So good point. So hopefully that's helped, folks. So my life hack today, Ben, is. It's actually inspired by you.
Oh!
It was inspired by you.
I'm flattered. Is this going to be a pump me up or pull me down?
Well, I haven't asked for your permission to use you as the case study here.
Right, yeah.
But, so today is Thursday, the 9th of August, right?
Yes.
It's a significant date in the diary of the Kingsley House.
Yes, it is. It's my oldest son's birthday. His 8th birthday.
And tonight we happen to be, we're not blowing out candles tonight.
No, we're working.
We're working. We're doing a webinar, right? So we've locked it in the diary. We did it ages.
Yep.
Your gorgeous and faithful wife, Jane, said to you, Ben, do you remember what's on the 9th of August? And he said, yeah, it's Jack's birthday. And he said, well,
not on. We got it. So for the listeners, we've got a wall which has a calendar on it, and that's sort of what. So we come in here and say, well, what can we do here?
Yeah.
Like when can we fit this in? And we put it there. What just happened? I just didn't happen to have my phone there to double check that date. Because I was just thinking, well, that looks free.
Task mode, we're not in people mode.
I'm not in Sydney. I'm not anywhere else. I'm not doing any other work.
Lock it in, it works.
I said, lock it in. You're not filming. Like if you look at our schedule, it's pretty crazy, right? So I'm thinking, here's this one little day, nothing's on. Just happens to be Jack.
So as much as I'd love to go to town on you about how irresponsible and how you have, I've done it multiple. Andrew's like, Bryce. So what we did, Ben, so hence my life hack, and I've come around.
I know where this is going now. This is good. Sharing calendars.
So Andrea now has her iPhone, and we've set that up to be the family calendar.
Very good.
So I can then add her calendar to mine, and then I can check. And so, but
clever.
So that's my life hack, and I throw that up. But I've got to say, the reason that system is now in place in my household is because of my version of what's happened today, happening in the past, prompting Andrew to just pull her hair out and go, we've got to sort this out. So,
and it's all right, Jack and I will have some QT time. We're going on holiday soon, so we'll be able to fill some memories up there, so don't you worry about that.
Good recovery.
I will make it up for you.
Love it. Ben, did you know?
Did you know, Bryce? I thought, well, we're talking about property prices. I thought I'd just do a quick little layup here. We probably haven't talked about. We're talking about property prices, so I'll give you the medians. Yeah. Now this is median value, so all dwellings, not houses, not units, so the whole lot, right? So here we go. Sydney, 864 rounded up. Melbourne, 709 rounded flat. Brisbane, 494,000. Adelaide, 438,000. Oh, I've got dyslexia. It's unbelievable. Okay, Perth, 450. I could never do the lotto numbers. Don't ever get me on TV. People are like, I won. Sorry, that was 38, not 28. All right. So Perth, 457,000. Hobart, 435,000. Darwin, 439,000. Canberra, 590,000. So combined capitals, 650, and then regional centres, 367. Nationally, 554,000 for our friends at Core Logic RP Data.
Oh, they've dropped the RP Data now, but
no, they have Core
Logic works. Hey, good segue for me, Ben. Sounds like with those median dwelling values, you should escape from the city. Like that.
Oh, have we got a date yet? Are we announced
very close, Ben. All I can say is stay close to the property couch, Ben. I'm going to.
As soon as you know,
announce
when
it here.
when the new series opens.
Code 4. I'm not 100% sure. They've given me a little bit of a tease, but it's a bit of a floating date. But mate, I'm 6 EPs down. I'm
beautiful.
Still got a few to go, which is fun. And a couple of things, Ben.
Yep.
Special guest next week. Mark McCrindle.
Oh.
He's a demographer.
I know Mark's work.
I cannot wait.
Should be fun.
Just to hear what he has to say about...
future of work, future of population, future of people.
Mate, these guys are amazing. They turn stats into just interesting stuff.
Insights.
If you just look at the stats on the paper, it's a bit boring, but they turn it into a bit of magic.
Love it.
And I've got a little project, Ben.
Yep.
I'm after someone who is a true fan of the Property Couch.
Yes.
Who loves what we do and is interested in working with me on a little project that I've got in mind for all of the nuggets of gold that have come from the podcast. Because I've got this idea, because we're now up to 108, this is 184 episodes, Ben.
Yep.
It's getting increasingly difficult for the people who've come to the party late
to
actually get all of the wisdom from the beginning, which is important to build the layers, as you know, Ben.
Yep.
So if someone is out there, if they want to email info@thepropertycouch.com.au, I've got this little project that they just might want to be involved in, and I can certainly share that out with...
Well, they may have been taking notes throughout the episodes and they've got a book of notes like Tim Ferrous does. Who knows?
Basically, we want to be able to extract the gold and share it with as many people as we can.
And we think some bits might be gold and others might think that's rubbish.
Yep.
But the stuff that we think is general run-of-the-mill stuff, they might think is gold.
Correct.
So I love the idea. It's a good one.
So if that's you folks, you want to help us out, we would love to get you involved on the Property Couch. We'll certainly give you a shout out. We'll make it worth your while. And if you want to reach out to Ivis, the Stig, at Ivis, what's your info at thepropertycouch.com.au.
And we will see all of you fine people who are keen enough to work out the 7 deadly sins in a couple of hours.
Yep, it's not too late, Ben. A couple of extra seats if you want to come along, do that. But Ben,
just a handful.
Just
Isn't
a
that
handful.
right?
Just
That's
a
right.
just a handful. I just threw them in now, are you? Should have seen that. Did you see the motion? It's just a handful. But people, if you want to be part of the handful, come along.
Yep.
Hey Ben, in closing off this, before we throw over to you,
Yes.
I'm going to just say, don't panic. This too shall pass. What's happening in the market has happened before. It will happen again. This too shall pass. The message of this episode is do not panic.
Well, I think the message probably also links into my little sign off too, which is knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it. And we're saying, see opportunity in the market, everyone.
And act on it. All right, mate. I will see you tonight on the webinar.
See you later.
And I will see you folks next week.